Hey, it's Rod Yates. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Humans of Music, a Jaxsta podcast. Each episode, I talk to a music creator or industry professional about their life and career, the ups and downs of their journey, and the lessons they've learned. And my special guest today is British singer, producer, and DJ Orlando Higginbottom, or as he's better known, Totally Enormous Extinct Dinosaurs. When Orlando's new album When the Lights Go comes out on September 9, it'll be 10 years since he released his previous album Trouble in 2012. Orlando wasn't completely quiet over that period, having toured the world and released a series of EPs and singles. But after the success of Trouble, he went through something of a personal and creative crisis as he struggled to figure out how to operate in the music industry, which is one of the things that contributed to the 10-year gap between records. We talk about that whole journey in this interview, as well as Orlando's upbringing in Oxford, his path into music, his memories of playing with Flume in Sydney while touring Trouble, and of course, the making of When the Lights Go. When I caught up with Orlando in mid-July, he was in an Airbnb in Los Angeles, a city he used to live in and which he might be calling home again soon. You're back in LA for good now, or for this promo run?
I think that I'm moving back here. I've been living out of a suitcase for the last 18 months in various places. The pandemic kind of chased me around for a bit, and for many reasons I've been all over the place. So I'm looking for a place in LA for a year or something. I don't know. The future's murky, so who knows?
Are you happy? Were you happy living out of a suitcase? Does that lifestyle appeal to you?
There are elements of it that are amazing. And I went and lived in Lisbon for a while, which was really, really fun, and sort of did that at the drop of a hat, which I recognize sort of most people my age can't just do that and don't have that kind of freedom. So yeah, I'm very grateful for it. It gets weird though after a while when you really don't have a external sense of home. That sort of thing starts to wear you down a bit. So I'm ready to sort of hang my clothes up and keep them there for a while.
Right.
Now.
As we sit here talking now, where do you feel like your external sense of home is?
Really, I think it's LA in the grand scheme of things. I mean, I lived here for 7 years up until 2021, and my sort of nearest and dearest friends are mostly here, to the point where I sort of feel like I have family here now,
Okay.
And feel very connected to the community I have. I still feel like I have other places to live in my life. I mean, it's early days, but, spending time in Lisbon was wonderful, and absolutely I could live there, and I could have settled there. I just, because of what I'm doing with work at the moment, feel that I need to be slightly more on the grid.
Sure.
That's all.
Was Lisbon creatively satisfying as well?
Yeah. To be honest, I'm kind of happy wherever I am in terms of making music, as long as I've got the equipment. That's really what it comes down to for me. But yes, very romantic city and lots of history, and it's not, what's the word? There's no hype there, right? So nobody's trying to be cool. Nobody's claiming coolness, which, is an absurd notion in itself, but there are cities that are sort of based around it. And everyone is just sort of getting on with their lives, and lunch is probably, and dinner is probably as important as anything else in the day.
Yeah.
Which I like a lot. And yeah, it was great. I mean, the last 2 tracks that I made for this album, I finished there and actually wrote there as well. So there was a bit of additional stuff that happened on this record while I was there. Yeah, I loved it, and met some amazing people as well.
Yeah. Which were those 2 songs that you wrote in Lisbon?
The title track for the album.
Okay.
When the Lights Go. And Be With You, quite a poppy number that's going to be the final single from the record. Right.
So 2 pretty key tracks.
Definitely. And I think that I was able to sort of finalize the concept of the record while I was there. I came up with the title track and it became the title, and it sort of helped me conceptualize and lean into exactly what the mood of the album would be, and I got rid of some tracks that didn't fit into that, and yeah, important work happened.
Yeah. When you think of the concept, is it a concept album, or are there loose concepts that flow through it if there's not one particular one?
I think there are loose concepts that flow through it rather than a single idea. And there's a bit of sort of poetic license and wordplay in that concept and in that title, and it has sort of multiple meanings, I guess in a slightly corny way, but that works for me. When I had the larger body of work and I was in the process of making it, I wasn't sure how to sort of funnel it down to one record, and I split the whole catalogue, the whole pile of ideas into moods, basically emotions. And essentially what you have with this album is one of those piles.
Oh, right.
There were 3 piles. There was a hopeful pile and a sort of feverish, panicky pile, and then a sad pile, a shut down pile. I've since learned that is sort of states of nervous system, like action, fight or flight, and shut down. But that I wasn't aware of that at the time.
Sure.
And what I've ended up with on this record is basically the shut down pile, so the sad stuff, with a little bit of the fight or flight panicky stuff. But to my ears with this record, there's no hopeful music. However,
he says, smiling.
Thankfully, friends of mine and people who've heard it have said that they do find it hopeful, and you know, how other people perceive the work is thankfully entirely up to them, and I'm cool with that.
Sure. So does that suggest there are other records, those other piles we will see released at some point in the near future as well?
Definitely, that's the plan. Yeah.
Okay. And so was, in terms of releasing, I guess, the shutdown pile, for lack of a better word, as the first taste of this new music, why that? Was that representative of the past few years in your life, or even the past decade since Trouble? Why did you gravitate towards those songs, do you think?
Perhaps because I mean, it is representative of, you know, definitely experiences and bits of my life. I feel like I'm sort of getting something out of my system. I feel like I'm kind of clearing the deck, you know? I don't know if you can relate to that, but when I'm writing or creating and I'm holding on to an idea, it's very, very close to me and it feels like it's mine and it's personal, and I'm quite protective over who I play it to, who I show it to, and I feel responsible for it. And then when I put it out, it's very much like a letting go, and I no longer feel responsible for it. It's almost no longer mine.
Right.
And other people can do whatever they want with it and react to it however they want, but it's like I have now like taken that off my shoulders.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of catharsis in putting some of the sad music together and sticking it out there.
And a sense of vulnerability as well?
Naturally, yeah. I mean, it's funny, that's very much like a buzzword, I think, of the last sort of period of music in the music industry. And I think it's a given.
Right.
I think it's a given. I think we're all, we're all being vulnerable. If you're not vulnerable in your creative act, perhaps you're not doing it properly. You know, it's there, of course.
Sure.
And it's fine. I think when I was younger, the idea of humiliation was quite strong in terms of creative decisions. And a lot of creative decisions sort of, and I still see lots of people do this, is the avoidance of humiliation. And, you know, will I choose route A or route B? Route A might sound cooler, but there's potential humiliation. Route B is fine, but there's no humiliation there. Most people will choose route B early on in their creative lives. And I very much feel like I'm beyond that moment, and it's not really a risk for me anymore. So the vulnerability thing is just like, yeah, of course. Yeah, the whole thing is vulnerable.
Sure.
Just having a chat with you is vulnerable, you know.
That's true.
It's fine though.
That's true. That's such a fascinating way of putting things, that concept of humiliation in terms of driving creative decisions. And I've never heard anyone put it in those terms before. Is that something that you were guilty of early on in your career or at points creatively in your life?
It's something I think about a lot, and I've been playing with that idea in my head for a long time. I speak to friends about it. I think that I see it in fashion and trends and culture. I had a couple of years in my life where I was when I was 13. This is going to get a bit therapy, but I think it's interesting enough.
Yeah.
I had a couple of years, sort of 13, 14, where I was at an all-boys school, and I was bullied. You know, people took the piss because I liked music and I liked theatre and I liked slightly different fashion stuff to them. And the insult during that period, I'm sure a lot of British kids will remember that, but the insult was to call someone gay. Basically, that was the sort of, you know, crazy moment. So there was just humiliation in liking what I liked. And I sort of just had to overcome that, I guess, while I was growing up. And so I was like, well, naturally came to the conclusion that if I do follow my passion in anything in life, there will be people who are threatened by that and weirded out by that, and may sort of give me a bit of shit for it, and that's fine. That's par for the course. So, but yeah, I think it's all around us. I think in this especially social media age, one of the main driving forces that people have is like, well, let's not embarrass ourselves here. You know, when they're making a decision about what they put up online, which is a funny thing to lean into and think about.
Absolutely.
Because the whole thing is embarrassing, you know. Everything is embarrassing. So.
Sure. That's that it could easily have gone the other way when you were 13 or 14 and you were being bullied for what you listened to. You could easily have tried to go with the crowd, I guess.
Yeah.
Where do you think you got the strength or the perspective to go, well, I don't care what you say, I'm still going to listen to this music?
I found the strength in music, definitely. First of all, I valued good music highly from a very young age, and I just knew it was really great work, and I just knew it was important and loved it and held it in great respect. And that when I was a kid, it was all like classical music was what I liked, and then when I started getting into popular music and electronic music and all the rest, then it sort of gave me even more of a sense of identity and opened up worlds to me. And there just wasn't anything that a bully could say that would take away how good music was. Like, you know, that was impossible. Sure. They could affect other things, definitely, like how I felt about myself, but not how I felt about music. So yeah, I had a pillar there. I mean, I feel like so many of us in the world have got that through music. It's wonderful.
Sure. And was it classical music at that point, or had you already started to discover electronic music and popular music?
At that moment in my life, I was coming into school listening to jungle and hardcore and drum and bass. So I was listening to like rave music, and then mostly that stuff. And sort of, I was yesterday I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole listening to old Kruder and Dorfmeister, like that KMD sessions, right? Kruder and Dorfmeister album, which I loved that stuff, and I was also remembering Jill Scott, who is Jill Scott, was a really important album to me at that time. And that was the first time I listened to hip hop and stuff, but that was the first time. I mean, I look at it now and I'm like, wow, this black woman poet was telling me about her life and across the world in Philadelphia. And I was like a little boy in Oxford going to an all boys school. And I was like, yeah, I get it. You know, just wild connections through sound.
Yeah, it seems crazy today that that's the kind of music you would be bullied for, because it's, as you said, it's such good music. And presumably at that time as well, you were on the cutting edge, I guess, at the forefront of discovering this music.
I mean, for that age, maybe a couple of years later, 4 or 5 years later, all those people loved that music or loved the rave music and stuff. But right. I was lucky. I grew up with a lot of elder siblings, and I was just sort of like, I would raid their bedrooms, basically steal a couple of CDs and cassettes and take them back for a bit of light nighttime listening. Right. And keep what I liked. So I had kind of a library available.
I think I've seen you talk about Life Forms by Future Sound of London as being one of those records you heard from your brothers, coming out of your brother's bedroom.
Yeah.
Was that a key moment for you?
Absolutely. That was my big brother. I remember him sitting me down. He had quite a big speaker in his room, and he sat me down and he played Goldie Timeless to me, and he was just like, sit down and listen to this. And I'm very grateful for that. But yeah, he had a Future Sound of London poster on the wall, and that album, I remember hearing that, and sort of acid jazz stuff like Galliano and Brand New Heavies. And then, what was the name? Oh, there's one band that I still haven't listened to that he had a poster of the wall on, Osric Tentacles.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I should really find out what that sounded like, because I thought the poster was really cool. It was like a wizard walking up some bubbles and some clouds, you know.
So getting back to When the Lights Go, and again, that sad pile of songs, because even though I do hear some hopeful music and some hopeful moments in this record, there is a track like The Sleeper, for example, and it's got that line in it, I hurt too many people, I don't think that love deserves my name. What was it like writing those words down?
It's sort of boring, but it just came to me very naturally. I was like, that's the lyric, that sounds good, and it feels true, but I didn't understand what it meant until years later. I thought when I wrote that song that I was writing a love song, a positive love song. And then I returned to it a couple of years later and I was like, oh no, this is not a love song. This is a total, like, I'm not worthy of love and depression and like terrible lack of self-worth song. So yeah, I mean, it sounds silly and sort of pompous, but I think it just sort of flowed out of me and felt right. And then it took me a while to understand what I was on about. Yeah, but that is a sad song.
Yes. So how long? It obviously had a bit of a gestation. It wasn't written and then finished. When is that like most of the songs on the record? I mean, you have released singles and an EP since Trouble, but do some of the songs on this record actually still go back, say to 2014, for example? Is it that lengthy a process?
Yeah, it is, and I think some material, in the future will come out from 2014, 2013. I think because it's songwriting and it's not producing beats, that works and I can do that. If it was very, very electronic music in the sort of 90s, 2000s sense of the sounds are cutting edge, then it would be a problem. And I did sort of drop some of that stuff. A lot of the songs would sort of be written on a day in 2015 and then I'd fiddle with them over years, and then be like, okay, I know how to finish this now, and I'd take it to the end. Or I would do lots of versions. There's a song called Never Seen You Dance, and that song, I think there are probably like 10 entirely different productions of that track.
Wow.
And that was an idea that I had in 2012.
Right.
That song. Yeah, it's funny thinking about it, because I know for a fact that, the most important moment of making music happens in a 20, 30-minute period, in terms of the idea explosion. Yeah. And then I can faff about for 5 years on something. And that's my problem. That's not something that anyone listening to this should think is the right thing to do. That's because I lack decision-making skills. and it comes down to making decisions like, is it this clap or is it this clap? Is it this groove? Is this bass sound? And just being like, okay, there you go. That's good. That's a 6 out of 10. That's a 7 out of 10. That's fine. Let's go. Right. But I wasn't very good at that for a while.
How do you keep your sanity during that process? Do you have sounding boards?
Yeah, I have a few friends that I run stuff by, and I'm very grateful to them. One of which is Chris Stracy from Bag Raiders, and I think he probably hears 50% of things that I make. Okay. And he sends me music as well, and I just I trust him, and he'll give me the right balance of sort of very basic dumb feedback, and then like that chord should be a different inversion. And he can hear both of those things, and he's a good mate. So that works for me. And there's a few characters like that. Okay. But I'm not playing music to any A&Rs or anything. Right. No way. Right. Yeah.
Well, because I had seen you say that you had a version of this record, even in around about 2016, that you could have released, but you couldn't really see a way to operate in the music industry at that point then that was healthy and fun for you. What do you mean by that? What does healthy and fun look like for you? in the music industry?
Yeah, good question. I think it means being in a respectful deal with a distributor or record label, feeling that my work is going to be taken care of when I let go of it, and that I'm empowered and respected as a artist and creator, let's say. And to my standards, the music industry doesn't really do that. I see people reaching that point in their 30s and 40s where they build business structures that are fair and work with their philosophies and their morals and ethics. But, all the artists, most of the artists I know who are in their 20s, they're uncomfortable with their deals and it affects them daily. And it shouldn't be like that. There doesn't need to be a compromise. We have the technology and the platforms that for there to be no dodgy middlemen here. You can have middlemen and you need them, but they don't need to be squeezing you or fibbing to you or putting you in lifelong terms or anything like that. It just doesn't need to be done. And I went through that stuff at the beginning of my career, and it was disempowering and it was disenfranchising, and it still bothers me that my record with Universal is in perpetuity. It's forever. I'll never own those masters. That's no big deal to them, but it's a big deal to me. And so I needed to find a way where I was going to own stuff. I was also going to get the professional people on board to give it the attention it needed and deserved. And I wanted to experiment with that. I wanted to find out what my ideal is, and I'm still figuring it out, and I think I'll be moving the pieces all the time, but sort of as a CEO rather than as a difficult emotional artist who doesn't know how the music industry works.
Sure. Which
is, I think, the natural perception of the artist and then the industry. So yeah, it took me time to figure that out, and I'm glad I took that time.
And was Nice Age, your record label that you started, was that part of figuring that out?
In a roundabout way. I mean, I initially started that so that I could release other people's music. I wanted to help young artists get a leg up. I wanted to use my profile at the time in 2013, 2014 to boost some people. And then it became the label that I started releasing on. And but it's the behind the scenes stuff. It's the paperwork that matters, and exactly what is being agreed to. And obviously, there's no transparency there from anybody. There aren't any artists sharing record deals. There aren't any labels sharing record deal contracts online. Nobody is like, this is how it can be done. This is what not to do. I wish there were, because, when I was in my 20s, I would have loved to have seen that. And there's plenty of artists now that would benefit from, understanding what's available if you know how to ask for it and where to look.
Sure. What do you think is one of the key things that you would have asked for if you'd known then what you know now?
Well, I definitely would have done a license deal rather than a master ownership thing. Right. So they own the masters. I would have licensed the masters to them. Even if it had been for 20 years, that would be better than lifelong ownership. That's really the main thing there. And then, of course, at that point, splits were terrible. And I now have a deal which is the exact inversion of that. It's the opposite.
Right.
But it's okay. It's okay. I feel like I've got away with it. I feel like things could have been much worse. I managed to get out of that deal very easily. They left a door open for me by accident, and I walked out.
Right.
If I'd been stuck with Universal while I was trying to make this album, and I had the pressure of a major label being like, "Where's this record?" I think I might have cracked. I don't think I would be here now.
Right. Did you still feel, I mean, you must have felt some sort of pressure, even just from an audience perspective or from the own internal pressure. Did you, as when it's 10 years in between albums, even though you had released other music, is there an incremental rise in the pressure that you put on yourself to actually complete a record?
It becomes more absurd. It just becomes more absurd. Because there's probably a sweet spot, maybe 4 years, but after a while, it's like the work I'm putting into it, I'll never get a respectable return of investment from this album. There's a personal one, but the amount of work I've put into this record, I wouldn't even ask for it. Like it's just absurd. So I very much have taken the pressure off this album a long time ago. It's just the next step. It's a project. And the music industry has gone to that point as well. 10 years ago, it was albums were sort of big calling cards. And now it's the next step. And, a lot of people are putting out an album every 2 years, an album every year. Rappers are putting out 2 albums a year. And I love that. It's like, let's build catalog and have a good time. I like it.
Yeah, nice. 10 years is a long time in a person's life. You're a different person, presumably, to the person who released Trouble. Are there, is that reflected in the album, do you think? Are there ideas that you have used on this record that you couldn't have done on Trouble, just from not a technical perspective, but just from being in a different place in your life?
Definitely. But a lot of the ideas for this album started immediately after I put out Trouble.
Okay.
I was like, okay, I want to do something much more organic. I want it to be less about the dance floor. I want it to be more about songs, more soulful, more songwriting. I want to sing more. And that was early. I think what's the only thing I can really put my finger on right now, though things will come to me in a couple of hours and I'll be like, I should have said that, is just my willingness to take risks. I guess what I was talking about at the beginning of this conversation. I think there's some stuff on this record that's pretty hit or miss. Like people could really like it, or they could absolutely hate it, and I'm up for that. That's cool. That's fine.
Nice.
And I think in 2013 I wouldn't take those risks, and I would be worried about there being a bit of vocal that's a bit out of tune, or something that's too emotional, or something that's too cheesy, or too R&B, or whatever. Now I'm just like, whatever.
Right.
It's for breakfast.
We'll be back with more from Orlando after this break. Welcome back to Humans of Music and my interview with Totally Enormous Extinct Dinosaurs. When you think back to that Trouble cycle, I even think of you coming down to Australia. I think you played a venue in Sydney called the Oxford Art Factory, which holds about 400 or 500 people, and you had Flume supporting you.
Oh, yeah.
And you think about that bill today in a club that small back then. Do you have fond memories of that period? Do you remember that show? But also just in general, that cycle for Trouble was an exciting time? Definitely
an exciting time. It was a dream. I have a regret, which is that I didn't really acknowledge how well it was going. I didn't know how to acknowledge how well it was going. And I always felt like I should be at the next level or whatever. And I don't think I was quite conscious enough of what was happening. That's the only thing there. But I remember that show. I mean, I remember every detail of that show. First of all, we sold it out in 2 minutes. And it was my first ever show that sold out that fast.
Right.
It was like, we sold that out in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Shit, people want to hear my music in Sydney, And there's a whole story there about the Flume thing that is not really for me to say, but there was some funny shit that happened. not in a between me and him way, but
right.
People who were there will remember. And it was a bit awkward. But yes, I mean, legend. Flume is a legend. And I remember Nina Las Vegas, the day before my show, said, this guy is playing before you. Do you know his music? He's kind of blowing up. And I was like, no, I never heard of him. And I was in the Triple J offices and she played me a couple of his tunes. And I was like, yeah, cool. This is cool. Yeah, guess, it sounds like sort of beats and trip hoppy stuff. I like this music. And then, I hear the crowd, what he's playing, and I can hear that they're loving it. And, within a year of that point, he had skyrocketed. And I think really he's one of the few artists in electronic music who I can honestly say is like a futuristic producer. Like, it was like that in the 90s and 2000s. People were trying to make the sound of the future. And I think that Flume is one of the only people that's still trying to do that. He's trying to blow your mind with sound and sonics. And name 10 other producers that are doing that. Like they aren't there, and they're not as big and as prolific as him. So I have a lot of respect for what he does. And to do something so experimental compared to everyone else and be that big is great. So,
Yeah.
I also had food poisoning from Jakarta, where I was the night before. I hadn't eaten anything. There was a bucket on stage. And I went afterwards to a bar, and it's come back to me. Is it called Flinders?
It might have been on Flinders Street, maybe?
On Flinders Street.
It could have been called Flinders. It's a while ago, yeah.
And it's shut now. And it had something to do with the Bang Gang guys and what they call the Bang Gang records. And the first thing I ate for 2 days was a bunch of pickleback shots after the show. So yeah, no, I remember that show very well.
Oh, it sounds like a good night. That thing that you spoke about, I guess, that idea of not perhaps taking the time to recognize your achievements as they were happening, that can be a maddening space to be in, I would imagine, because at some point it's never going to be enough because you're always thinking about the next thing. Did that catch up with you at any point after the trouble cycle?
It caught up with me during Trouble. And that's why I stopped doing the live show, because, the shows were growing and we wanted to go up a venue. And then I was like, okay, I've played, I've taken all the steps up here and I'm not getting more satisfaction out of this. And I feel actually that I'm selling a bad product to people. I didn't understand that your role is to go up there and play the big tunes. I thought I needed to go up there and bring something completely fresh every night and like a whole new perspective on performance every time I played a new London venue. And I was just so confused about what my job was, really, and exhausted. And yeah, I didn't sort of stop and go, well, I just sold out Shepherd's Bush Empire. Like, that's pretty great. How about you go on holiday?
Right.
Like, I didn't do that. I just was like, okay, stop this. I've got to go and make a new record. And then that's when things sort of fell apart for me for a while. I kind of got lost in it, and I kind of don't know how to describe it really. There was a sort of pressure that it wasn't just the shows. I also was sort of supposed to deliver a radio record, and that, it was great that Radio 1 had supported my music, and it was great that Triple J, but we hadn't had one that like really went. And wouldn't it be good if we had one that really went? And that was definitely that era of the music industry as well. It was so radio centric, and I was just like, I'm tired of this. Like, I'm tired of chasing this thing. And yeah, it took me a while to sort of figure it out and get enthusiastic again. And yeah.
Did you have the people around you that supported you during that time? Because there's obviously pressure, I presume, to keep going. Let's get that radio record. Were there people in your corner who understood and said, all right, step back?
You might have to cut this bit out. No.
Right.
I didn't. I mean, I had great people for certain things, but no, they didn't know that I was cooked and they couldn't see it. Yeah.
Okay.
So no, I didn't.
So how did you get through it?
I hit like rock bottom, and I saw the sort of bottom, I saw the lowest point, and I realized that something was very, very, very wrong. And I started climbing up from there. But it took me going to the bottom. Mm. And that was sort of, that was a close call, nothing dramatic, but dramatic enough. And, I got to the point where I was just like, I don't want any of this, And then I had a birthday in 2018, and I had this song called Leave a Light On that I'd been sitting on for years. It had been finished. And somebody texted me and they said, what are you doing today? And I was like, going to go out later. And they were like, remember to do something for yourself, whatever, some cheesy shit. And I was like, you know what? What I could do for myself is just slap this up on SoundCloud and just let the chaos happen. Just like be chaotic, which I naturally am a chaotic person. I have a great disregard for the rules, but I got really caught up in needing everything to be in the right place before I released music again. And I just put it up on SoundCloud, and everything got moving again from there. So it's a story I can't really tell, but in a way that the cheesiest version of it is that like the big symptom that I knew that something was wrong with me was that I wasn't being proactive as an artist. I was making lots of music, but I wasn't putting it out. And I guess I recognized that that was an illness, as it were, or it was connected to unhealthiness. And I started putting music out, and in that was the fix. So I had to sort of look into that and get into that. And then I guess that's where I'm at now, is just sort of, it's okay. I love making the best music I possibly can, but sometimes it's just okay. And we'll get on with it. We'll put it out and we'll do the next one.
Yeah.
And I hear a lot of older musicians say stuff like that. You know, I'm not new here.
Right. But it's a big realization. Yeah. Huge realization.
But it's a big realization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember pressing upload on Leave a Light On or whatever the button is that you press? Do you remember that feeling?
Yeah. And I checked in with a couple of friends and they were like, don't do it. And I was like, I'm doing it. And then I put it upload. I tweeted about it, put it on Facebook, whatever. Said, it's my birthday. This is a present to myself. Here's some music. I can't remember. And then went out and got drunk and then came home sort of 7 hours later and switched my phone back on and had a look at what had happened. And I had a big old cry.
Nice.
And it was great. Yeah.
What a moment. That's great.
Yeah, it was a big turning point in my life, actually.
Yeah, nice.
Just putting a song online.
Just a couple more things before we wrap up. But we spoke briefly about growing up in Oxford earlier in the conversation, and that's a part of the world which I love. I spent a year just outside of Oxford in Abingdon, in a little town in Oxfordshire, and I love that area so much. But what was it like to grow up in, around the big spires in Oxford and I guess that sense of academia that runs throughout the town? Were you aware of that? Was it, are you conscious of that when you're young?
100%. My dad was a professor and we lived right in the middle of all the colleges in a house that belonged to the university, and I was very connected to it, and I felt that it was mine in a way. Like I felt welcome in it, which is rare for Oxford kids. A lot of Oxford kids feel that there's a divide between the university and them, and there is. But I didn't have that because I could go in the buildings and I could run around the gardens and stuff. So there was that sort of like magical side to it, and I loved feeling the history, and I really felt like very connected to history growing up there. I didn't feel like it was sort of a different world that the characters from the history books inhabited. I felt that it was the same place I was walking, and that I was just part of that thing. It was really cool. And then, as a teenager, there was everything else I needed there. There were amazing raves and parties and bands and cool small live venues that you could get into as a kid. And it was fairly sort of like lefty, I guess, and kind of weird. And I had a couple of record shops that I went into every day, and there was a sort of edgy side to it. It wasn't all safe. I got messed around with enough times to learn how to look after myself. And up until I was, an adult, it was amazing. And I was kind of spoiled in that way, because then when I did move to London at one point, I was like, this is just a rubbish version of where I grew up, like twice as expensive and not as pretty. So yeah, I loved it. I had an amazing time, really, and I look back at it. The memories are kind of golden in that sense, in the kind of Oxford sense. It was amazing. Yeah,
and the fact that I believe your dad was a choral professor, so he was obviously, you could see that music was a profession that he followed. Did that give you a sense that music was something serious that could be taken seriously, and that it could be a profession and not just a hobby?
Oh yeah. I mean, my idols as a kid, my heroes were Mozart and Bach, and I was like, not only is it serious, it's the coolest, most profound thing you can do with your life. I don't think that so much anymore, but I was really like, yeah, that's it, that's the pinnacle.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sure. I knew, I think that when I was a kid, I thought maybe I could be a classical musician. I didn't really want to be, but I thought maybe that was a path. I didn't know that there could be a path where I was making my own music, modern music. And certainly as a kid, I was a horrible little snobby shit. I thought that anything with drums on it was rubbish. And, I was like, give me this Mozart symphony or get out of my house. So I wouldn't want to have met me when I was 7, but I got better.
That explains why your brother sat you down and said, listen to this.
Yes. Yeah, probably. I'll have to ask him what was going on there. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you would go to shows. Do you remember the first show that really impacted you that you saw in Oxford growing up?
Several, but there was a Radiohead homecoming show in South Park, which is a park that's half a mile from the house I grew up in, and I was 16 or something, and everybody got tickets, and thankfully they sold the tickets locally, so you could buy it at the local guitar shop and the local music shop and whatever. So we all got tickets, and that lineup was crazy. I mean, it was before I even knew any of the music, and I wasn't a huge Radiohead fan at that age. I knew their music, I liked it, but I was into other things. But just the atmosphere of that show and the musicality of it, and I was just like, it was magical. And the feeling of the crowd, it was magical. And it was the first time I'd been in a big, field listening to really good music, and it smells like you're on a farm because everyone's just treading in mud and cigarettes and beer and sweat, and it was raining, and that changed the game. And then there was a rave I went to in the back room of a pub that was Nicky Blackmarket and MC Det, so a drum and bass DJ and MC duo, and that was the first legal rave I got into, club night I got into, and I was just so happy because I'd been listening to the music for sort of 6 years or whatever, or 5 years, and I was buying records, and then I was, I was like in heaven. I was in heaven just throwing shapes for 5 hours. That was a happy night. I remember a lot of the records, and yeah.
Were you DJing yourself by that point?
Yeah, I was playing house parties and sort of played at the youth club, and I was just playing drum and bass. And I was sort of on a drum and bass path for a long time. And then I sort of hit a thing where I was like, okay, at that point in the scene, there weren't many women around at the parties. And it was kind of like it wasn't sort of the aggression of it, because it wasn't aggressive. It was just blokey and dry. And I was like, I'm not going to get in this world. And I don't really want to be part of it. I think there might be something else. And that change there was kind of what started this project, this Totally Enormous Extinct Dinosaurs project. I was like, how about the kind of the opposite of that, which is like something absurd in a genre of music that I don't know anything about, and I just like throw around sounds and I'm a bit of an idiot. Let's see what that does. And I made a MySpace, and then,
Yeah.
I was like, let's do the opposite of cool. Let's do the opposite of what I think is cool and everyone thinks is cool, and see what happens. And here we are.
It's such an interesting mindset to go into it, though, to then have it take off. Does that when things do take off and other people start getting involved and crowds start getting involved and you're releasing music, what's that transition like from this is going to be fun, I'm just going to throw this up and do the opposite what everyone else is doing, to okay, this is how I make a living now?
It was weird. It was weird. I mean, it was great, and I couldn't believe it when I stopped. I stopped my day job, and I was like, I'm a full-time musician. But I think that's where the sort of disconnect with the success came for me. It was sort of rooted in that a bit as well. Just not really. I didn't quite understand the project, and nobody else quite understood the project. So I've always been in this sort of like, I'm very, very serious about music. I think that music culture is stupid, and that we get it all wrong. So here I am, deal with it. And I'm sort of saying that to myself as much as anybody else. Here I am. I think if I'd taken myself entirely seriously, I wouldn't make good music, and I wouldn't have had so much fun. I'm glad that I sort of chose this wonky path.
Sure. Last two things. Do you remember the first time you showed someone your music prior to this project, but just in general, and actually had someone say, you're good at this?
Ooh. At one school I went to, they had copies of Sibelius, the music notation program, on the computers, and I found it in a computer lesson, and then I was like, I need to go and use this because I can get sound back. And I would go in the lunch breaks and use it. And the IT teacher, I can't remember her name, but she was nice, and she could hear what I was doing through the headphones. I was 10 or 11 or something. And I remember her sort of being impressed, and she recognized, because I was taking a TV theme tune from memory and I was putting it into the computer and rearranging the harmonies and stuff. And she was like, "Is that the tune from da-da-da?" And I was like, "Yeah, it is." And she complimented me, and I was into that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's a weird one. I'm very happy when people like my music.
Sure.
But don't take it on board too much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Given that Jaxsta is all about giving credit where credit is due, are there people that you'd give credit to for helping you get where you are today?
Oh, yeah. Musically, definitely. Chris, who I mentioned earlier, Chris Tracy, is one of those people. And, there's sort of two types of work, really, because there's the work where you're an official producer or an official songwriter and you're credited very literally and in the metadata. And then there's just the sort of work that we all do as friends with ears. And, that is, we don't put that credits anywhere, but that's incredibly valuable and important to me. And so I have plenty of friends that, have just encouraged me along the way, that all I can sort of do is say thank you to them to their face and, shout them out publicly now and then. On this album, I worked with a few producers, Patrick Wimberley on a tune, who's done a lot of amazing stuff over the last few years, and then Julian Bonetta, who's obviously an incredibly successful producer, and Chris Tracy, and then Ben Rutner from the group The Knox.
Right.
We did a track. But it's mostly me and, the odd session musician here and there. But I fit into that world on the other side quite a lot. I do more and more production and writing for people, when it's right. And it's another thing that at the beginning of your career, you don't know how to advocate for yourself in that space. And it can be quite awkward being like, "Hey, I think I deserve, 20% of publishing on this song."
Yeah.
And then you get good at it and it's no longer a problem, because it's fine. You're just saying, "Hey, I think I deserve 20% of publishing on this song," which is not a big deal. But that sort of thing used to give me the ick. I used to be afraid of having those conversations. And now it's almost fun now, because it's like, how are we going to reward each other for this great work? How are we going to look after each other? How are we going to make sure that everybody is getting credit where it's due? And I see sort of musicians really coming together over it more than being divided by it. We know how important it is now.
Yeah, that's such a great space to be in, isn't it? When you take the business, I guess it is business, but you take the business out of it as well and just almost do it on a human level about how do we give fair credit for this?
Right. And because I'm self-releasing this album, I have the space and the control to not do like point systems. I can actually say to somebody, "Hey, 10% of the master, you're getting a 10% master royalty from this. And here, look, here's how the entire 100% is divided up. There's nothing's hidden here. You're getting this." And that's such a relief to me to be able to do that for people and not be like, do it through a label where they're offering someone 1 point and then the person has to come back and be like, "Come on, give me 2 points," And so it's another pleasure in doing it my way.
Nice.
To be transparent with my collaborators, and in that I pay them better.
Nice. Orlando, thank you so much for all your time today. It's been really great to chat with you. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
And that's it for another episode of Humans of Music. A big thanks to Orlando for his time, and thank you for listening. Just a reminder that the new Totally Enormous Extinct Dinosaurs album, When the Lights Go, is released on September 9. This episode was mixed by Lachlan Mitchell from Parliament Studios in Annandale, and the incidental music and theme song were written and performed by Sam Lockwood. Please remember to subscribe to the Humans of Music podcast so you never miss an episode, or even better, share it amongst your friends and rate and review it. And remember, next time you need to know who wrote a song, who produced a song, who engineered it, who played on it, who sang on it, who did anything on it, head to jaxsta.com for all your official music credit information. Until the next episode of Humans of Music, I'm Rod Yates. Thanks for listening.